Hello and welcome to this solo episode of the Buttcast. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a guest this week, so it's just going to be me. But we do have a lot to talk about regardless. The main topic of today... Oh, by the way, it's episode 22.5. The main topic of today is going to be the upcoming format post tier limit, ban list, post YCS 3v3, and a couple other events that have happened. The Kashtira format, as you might call it, and specifically about budget players and what are we going to be playing this format. So, couple things of note. What is the format? You can hear my computer dying. So what is the format? We've got, I'll pull up some recent events. We've got in WCQ and MontCon, we've got MathMech got first place, Sun Avalon. I think we'll chalk that up to WCQ weirdness. And then we've got Branded, Kashtira, and some other stuff, Branded and Sprite, right? And there's some other ones. We've got Nesturia, Kashtira, some other weird stuff, Sprite. Definitely Kashtira is the main contender of note for the time being. Labyrinth seems to have already kind of fallen off. We'll see how that evolves going forward. And so if I was to give a summary of kind of what to expect right now, it's going to be mostly Kashtira, followed by Branded, and then you're going to start seeing a toss-up between some other strategies, like Labyrinth, Sprite, Naturia. I'll call that Tier 2. And then we're going to see a lot of weird decks that are filling in all the gaps. A lot of weird decks that I'll call Tier 3, like the MathMech, Exo-Sister, some Punk variants, Scareclaw, and Avalon, all that sort of stuff. It's able to sneak in, but it's definitely not part of the normal metagame. So that's kind of what we're working with. So when you're asking yourself about what budget decks people can play, or rather what I can play, because that's why I'm talking about this, because I had tier limits banned out from under me, and I need to figure out what I'm going to play for the upcoming format. And I'm looking through this. Kashtira obviously is just way too expensive. There's no way you can build a budget variant of Kashtira. But let's talk about Branded. So Branded, the topping variant, is playing Cartesia. It's playing a couple Bestials, but mostly just Despia cards, along with the standard Branded engine. And some of them are playing the Fusion deployment, specifically for stuff like Dark Magician, as in the extra stuff, the Aqua Dolphin thing that we talked about for the YCS 3v3, all that sort of stuff. So, from a budget perspective, what does that deck look like? Well, Cartesia is too expensive. She ranges between $40, $50, $60. And she's really important. She's a very good card. She's the real reason to play Fusion Deployment, because you can summon her for free. And then she can give you a Fusion summon and use herself as material if you want. Whenever you want, because she's a quick effect as well. So without her, that power level gets knocked down a huge amount. What are the other expensive cards? Well, Guardian Chimera is $40, but that's kind of unavoidable at this point. No matter what variant you're going to play, you're going to have to play it. So that's just kind of a accepted cost. And there was one other card, Lubellion. And Lubellion is also very expensive. Upwards of $60 all the way up to maybe $80. Crazy expensive. So, for the budget variant, you're not going to be able to play the Cartesias, which means Fusion Deployment's basically out. You're not going to be able to play the Bestial cards because Lubellion's too expensive, which means we've done a $140 card and we're just going to have to live with that, and that's the Chimera. So how can you build the best deck using just the Branded cards, excluding Cartesia and Lubellion? Well, it looks like old Branded. It's Branded before they got those new cards, because those are newer cards. It looks like how Branded looked in Master Duel right before Sprite came out. That's what we're working with. So that's going to be your classic Expulsion to special summon something to your opponent's field that locks them out, and making your Mirror Jade banishing itself to set the Branded in red, or the Expulsion if you don't have it. Stuff like that. You're doing that normal stuff. And the supplemental engines are, of course, going to be the Frightfur cards, just because you need access to more fusion summons. That's what we're using to replace specifically Cartesia, is that we have to have more fusion summons, so it's the best way to do that is with the Frightfur cards, since they also get you advantage. And that's just what that deck looks like. There has been some innovation in that the Gimmick Puppet is a much better version of Ra's Disciple, which is something that we were confused about when we were reviewing the 3v3 deck lists. You send it off of Branded Fusion to make the Lubellion, and then you do your normal plays from there, and then you Expulsion to give it to your opponent. It activates, telling your opponent they cannot special summon except Gimmick Puppets for the rest of the turn, which is perfect because no one's on Gimmick Puppet. And now, even if they remove it, even if they had droplets, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're going to be locked, which is really good. It's a very cool innovation. Definitely makes the deck a lot better. But you are playing $40 and everything else, so it's probably going to be somewhere in the $100 range, to have a branded deck that most of the time, the only thing you're doing is Expulsion, and then you do have a pretty good grind game, but if they have a way to stop the Expulsion, you lose. In high-end hands, you're going to have Expulsion, Mirror Jade, and the Branded Red setup, but that's going to be rarer, and you still lose to Ash Blossom. You can mitigate that with, like, Crossout if you want to play that. Not a bad card this format, I think. That's my projection, my guess, for what's going on in the future of this format. But that's going to be an issue. It's just much lower power level. It's probably going to be the most popular budget deck, just because it is the best deck that can be reduced to a budget deck. That is my opinion. It will be the most popular budget deck because it is the best deck that you can reduce. The fact you can get a lot of the cards from 3 structure decks definitely helps. A lot of people probably already own, much like myself, already own 3 of the structure decks, already have a lot of those cards. But it's just getting all those extra stuff only for it to be a much, much worse version of Branded, to me, makes it feel like there are other options for budget players. So let's talk about that. Punk looks fun. Unfortunately, the Regulux and the Therions are too expensive, so Punk's really more of a fun deck. Sprite is obviously still very expensive. Mathmech is a cool little rogue deck. It's not very expensive. It's not very powerful. The ceiling isn't very high. But it does do what Mathmech does, and it was able to get first place at a WCQ. So don't knock it till you try it. It's a combo deck that has a very high consistency thanks to cards like Small World, and you have a lot of room for non-engine cards like the Ash Blossoms, the Nibs, the Eclipse. So definitely an option for budget players that you should be considering. Personally, what I'm looking at is Sword Soul. Now that Baron has got a reprint, I am amazed that the Baron reprint has lowered the original printing by half. It went from being upwards of $140 all the way down to $60, which is still too much. But the fact that the original print went down that much, I hope means that as we get more circulation of the product, that the new copy can sit somewhere around $40 like a Guardian Chimera, except you're going to be able to build the best version of Sword Soul instead of being able to build a much worse version of Branded. Admittedly, Sword Soul doesn't really have as much potential as Branded. Branded probably is the deck that has better opportunities for upgrading further along the line. But Sword Soul also has been more consistently playable at the rogue level than Branded has. Because Branded has that problem where it loses so hard to Ash Blossom and other problems like that, where Sword Soul is just a lot more resilient. And Sword Soul is a good deck because it has a really, really small brain line every time you can take. But at the same time, it really does reward you if you know what you're doing and you think about how exactly you can sequence things as optimally as possible. So that's why I'm looking at Sword Soul. The falling off of the Bestials is a thing worth noting. That's part of the reason why Mathmact is coming back. That's because the Bestials are just almost completely out of the format. The only one people are playing is Sarnier, specifically in Branded, and you're not playing very many copies. You're probably just playing the 3 and probably not even playing Magnamut. So you don't have to worry about that as much, so light and dark decks are suddenly a lot better. But there's some more options that are kind of lurking in the shadows. So obviously I mentioned the Sun Avalon. I'm pretty sure that's too expensive, especially since they're incorporating Therion and the Adventure Engine. If you have the Adventure Engine, by the way, congratulations, you're able to play it in a lot of different things right now. It's got applicability in branded variants and cashier variants. And to be honest, it's not very good in most things, but it's very expensive. So if you're on it, I would recommend honestly selling it, because I don't think it'll be good anytime soon, other than kind of niche variants of meta decks. But for some reason, it still commands a very high price tag. I'm not a market guy, so I could be very wrong, but to me it seems overpriced. So again, that sprite's too expensive. Branded, you have a budget variant that does have good upgrade ability, but it lacks, to me, that refinement. It feels like you're just playing an old deck, which to me just isn't fun. I would rather play Sword Soul, even if it is the same way we're playing Sword Soul forever. At least you're playing the best version of Sword Soul. Now, let's get on to some really interesting stuff. Tri-Brigade. As a lot of people have been talking a big game about how good Bird Up is, even though it hasn't really gotten much success, notably. But people have seen it at events, and they've said, wow, this deck seems really good. So it's definitely worth considering Bird Up variants. As you probably know, if you've ever tried to build Bird Up, right now, without some more, it's really difficult to tell what the inboard should look like. You can go for the inboard where you make the Ensemble Robin, and for a lot of material on it to bounce a lot of cards, or you can get Revolt. Revolt gives you a better grind game, but the Ensemble Robin is pretty definitively a better inboard. So that's going to be up to you, and neither of those decks are especially expensive. They're not cheap, but a lot of you probably already own some amount of these cards. For instance, the Utopic Future package is way down. It's really cheap now, comparatively, to where it was before. So that's not as much of a concern. A couple other cards also, and also just the fact that it's not the metagame anymore, means that the price has dropped a lot compared to where it was before. So that's all things to keep in mind. That's all things to note about what sort of budget decks. Another thing of note is Flunder. Flunder is bad. It hasn't topped. A lot of people really like Flunder post Barrier Statue ban because it's a lot more skillful. But you just don't have very many points of interaction with your opponent, and the interactions just don't match up that favorably against the current metagame. So in my opinion, even though I personally own full Flunder, I don't think it's a competent deck for this upcoming format, especially since Shifter doesn't do anything, cards like that. So I'm looking at it as being a not very good deck this format, just because losing the Barrier Statue hurts the power level so much. It just can't compete. But back to Tri-Brigade, there is a new variant of Tri-Brigade that some of you may have already seen, which is Tri-Brigade FTK. Who don't know how the combo works, you're basically just using Rescue Ferret to get to Telephon FTK. The Telephon FTK is, Telephon is a level 1 Morphtronic monster who lets you roll a dice, and then you gain life points equal to the result, and summon a Morphtronic from the graveyard whose level is equal to or less than the result. Well, the minimum result is always going to be 1, so you can always summon another copy of Telephon, and it is a soft once per turn. So if you have Cannon Soldier and 2 Telephon, or even 1 Telephon and 1 in the graveyard, you just win the game. And how are we doing that? Rescue Ferret says you can shuffle it into the deck, special summon monsters whose total level equals 6 to the link points of monsters you control. So if you have something like an Appaloosa, which has 3 downward pointing zones, you can just summon 3 monsters whose total levels equal 6, but their effects are negated, which is going to be your Cannon Soldier, which is level 4, Telephon level 1, which is 6 total. And then, with the new card, the Zealantis, which isn't that new, but we all knew this is what it was going to be used for. The Zealantis, you can just use Appaloosa as material for it, banish every card you control, special summon them all back, and now the Mortronics and the Cannon Soldier have their effects again, so you can just perform the FTK. So you just need to search Rescue Ferret and summon it and have Appaloosa. So the most basic way of doing that is to have Tinky or bad at remembering names sometimes, or Fractal. Tinky or Fractal and a Tri-Beast, let's say DD Crow. So you go through the normal thing where you Fractal for Kit, for Nerval, for Kuraz. You're specialing the Kuraz by pitching the Tri-Beast. Banish all 4 of them for the Omen. Link summon the Bear Brum. And then the Omen's going to trigger adding the Ferret. And the Bear Brum, you're going to pitch 2 blank cards to special summon, let's say Kit. Kit, you have 2 in the graveyard. You banish them for the Ferret. Activate Ferret to special the Ferret rather. Link the Bear Bum and the Ferret off for the Appaloosa, and bam, now you have it. Now you have the Appaloosa and the Ferret, and that's FTK. What advantage does this have over other variants of Tri-Brigade? Well, modern Tri-Brigade, the control deck is dead. It's just not powerful enough to stop the current metagame. The current metagame is just too high power level for the minimal boards that pure or other control variants of Tri-Brigade can put up. So the only option you have is combo. This is combo, and obviously the Bird Up version is combo. Bird Up, you're setting up essentially an FTK by putting up so many disruptions. And its advantage is that it has not as many garnets, and it's very consistent. The FTK is also very consistent. You don't have to worry about board breakers that people are playing, especially for Kashtira. People are playing a lot more Lava Golems in the Book of Eclipse and other cards like that, evenly matched in the main deck, stuff like that. So you are less susceptible to the board breakers that everyone's playing for Kashtira, while at the same time you do win the game because it's an FTK. And it's also very consistent. I did many test hands. Obviously, you're going to get dead hands. It's not as consistent as some other strategies, but you do get the FTK off most of the time, and even when you don't, you end on the old school Tri-Brigade, like Rugal plus Revolt, which obviously isn't good enough most of the time, but if you bricked, maybe they bricked, who knows? Or if they hand draft you, then you can usually still end on the Revolt setup to make the Omen, and probably having a few hand traps of your own. Because if one hand trap was enough to stop you, it's probably because you have a lot of hand traps in your hand. So that's another good thing about this FTK, compared to the Bird Up version, is you can play a lot more hand traps. In the Bird Up version, you have to fully commit to playing all of these extenders and combo starters that you don't really have very much room for going second cards, which is a real hindrance when Kashtira demands a going second card. You can't beat it with Engine. Now, maybe Zeus is a nice way to beat it with Engine on occasion. They're probably going to banish that from your extra deck, though, so you might have to play 2. A lot of factors, as you can imagine, go into how good that deck is. But the fact that it hasn't had any results tells me it's probably not very good. I just think that the fact that the board doesn't immediately win you the game and you lose to a lot of the board breakers that people are already playing for better decks makes it not worth playing. That's why I think the FTK is better. Because the FTK actually did top a regional. Now, there's a lot to say about that. That guy's list didn't seem super refined, I'd say. Which is why I've been working on trying to cook up my own version that I'll probably share with you before this recording's over. And although it definitely has a weakness, for instance, because of the Zealantis, you're removing your own Appaloosa and bringing it back with 0 attack points. So if they wait till late in the combo to use their interaction, you lose and you don't even get access to Revolt or anything like that. If they save a Effect Veiler or an Imperm till later in the combo, or if they... So then you're just screwed. If they, however, use it early, which is what is normal against Tri-Brigade, is to use your interactions more early. You would use them usually on Omen. If your opponent's doing something where they're linking summoning Omen and then linking it off, that's a prime thing to Ash. Generally, that's the correct thing to Ash as well. A lot of people like to Ash a Fractal or a Nerval, stuff like that. And the Imperm, you usually only just use that on the normal summon or the special summon of Karas to help to prevent them from getting off to the races in the first place. And if your opponent does something like that, then you're going to just do standard Tri-Brigade, set Revolt, have some hand traps. Simple as that. And in high tier hands, you actually can perform the FTK even if they hand trap you once. The problem now, certain things, if they hold an Ash really long, then you're going to make an Appaloosa and it's not going to matter anymore. So that's a hand trap that stops mattering. But unfortunately, Nib, Effect Veiler, and Imperm really do kill you. That's why I'd say it's good to play very specifically the Crossout Designator in this deck. I think Crossout Designator, like I said, is coming back into prominence. In part because the branded lists have been playing it, because again, they just lose so hard to Ash Blossom. They need more ways to combat it. And so they've decided to play the Crossout Designator. And I think this is a very similar situation, where we're playing Crossout Designator. And again, this deck, you have room for hand traps. So you're playing a lot of hand traps that work as Crossout Designator targets, and also just help you not lose going second, which is something that I feel is really missing from the bird up version of the deck. So let's go ahead and go over the list that I have here. So the first up is going to be the obvious stuff. We're playing the triple Rescue Cat, which Rescue Cat plus Tri-Beast is also full combo, full FTK. Then we got 3 Fractal, 3 Karas, 3 Kit, 3 Nerval, 3 Tenki, a Foolish Burial, a 1-for-1, the Ferret, 2 Telephone, and Cannon Soldier necessary for the combo, 3 DD Crow. Even though it's not very good, it's a Tri-Beast, so it makes your deck a bit more consistent, and every now and again it'll have utility. And then the normal hand traps is 3 Ash, 3 Nib, a Lancia, and an Imperm for the Cost Out. We're playing 3 Cost Out, 1 Call by the Grave, and also the 1 Revolt I forgot to mention. And then the extra deck, of course, is pretty standard. Access Code, Oath, Appaloosa, IP, Almirage, Lightheart, Bearbrum, Baron Blossom, or Fairjeet rather, Rugal, Shureg, Zealantis, which is important for the FTK, and then specifically 2 Omen. And then I'm playing a Zeus package, a Zeus Downard Centuria. So I'm thinking my opponent is going to banish the Zeus from my extra deck, since it's the only out for the board. And I don't really have room to play 2, though. So, extra deck, specifically working around... And this is where I'm going to ask for help from you, the audience. Specifically working around what cards are they taking out of your extra deck? What is your game plan going second? You notice there's a lot of hand traps, especially the 3 DD Crow, that have limited utility. And there's also, a lot of the times you actually have too many Tri-Beasts in your hand. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement for cards that help push through interaction in this deck. And I've looked through all the Tri-Beasts I can think of to find anything that does a better job at pushing through extension. It might be that playing Gamma and just hoping your opponent, you waste their disruption early, is the way to go. I don't know. It's definitely something that's just going to need more testing, and I'm going to keep working on it because I think it's fun, even though it's an FTK. It's a goofy FTK, so it is what it is. It's unfortunate. I just think it's the best way to play the deck. I'd prefer something like Bird Up was better, but I genuinely think that the FTK is better, which is a weird thing to say, but it's what I believe. I think that's about that for budget decks. The Naturia deck is just too expensive. Exo Sister is worth looking into. I would like to see if anyone can come up with something on that. Oh, for the other things I was considering in the FTK list, I was considering playing Jackalope and Bigfoot as just cards that cycle and put some bodies on the board to make it a little more consistent in theory. I'm not sure how well that would work, but I'd be curious to see what y'all think. And also, Tri-Brigade Sprite is too expensive, but you can build a cheap version of it that doesn't have as high a ceiling as Bird Up, but I think is more consistent and has better lines going second. So I'd be curious to see if my fellow budget players could take the time to try to flesh out what that might look like. Speaking of budget players in general, I really miss Hardleg's $100 Battle of the Budget decks. I'd very much like to see that return, although I'm sure that he has a good reason for not doing it. My community isn't really big enough to host an event like that, although I would very much like to. If that's interesting to you and you would be interested in seeing a special episode in which I round up my friends to try to build budget decks and play against each other and record it, I would like to hear your responses in the comments. But I don't know, budget right now, there's not an obvious budget contender, and there are a lot of options. There's no obvious answer, but there are a lot of options. Oh, I forgot to mention Labyrinth. Obviously, Labyrinth is far too expensive. Bit of waifu bait there. Of course, I am glad that I have a fun deck still, my fun deck being Magispector. And again, I would like to make a sincere plea to everyone. Please build a fun deck. You do not have to worry about decks getting banned out of existence if you have a fun deck. I lost tier, but I still have my fun deck. And the problem is that my fun deck is perfect for playing people who are newer in the game, and they don't really have a better deck. But a lot of the people I play against are into it, and they have very good decks. They have full-out Branded or Sword Soul or whatever. And the fun deck doesn't really hold up to those. I wish more of those people would have fun decks. So, for me, that's Magispector. I just recently have started looking into my second fun deck being Witchcrafter, which I think will be fun. Unfortunately, the Ecclesia, or Cartesia, is a very, very good card in Witchcrafters as well, but it's just too expensive. So we have to settle for the Magistus cards to help us fusion summon. Yes, I am also now a connoisseur of spell Witchcrafters. So I really wish the Adventure package was cheaper, because I think it's the thing that really opens the door for a lot more cheap variants of budget decks if it was affordable. I think maybe it might be the fact that it's a little bit too waifu bait that it ended up being so expensive. You can debate that in the comments. So yeah, that's what I think about this upcoming format. And I think I might make a bit more guidance for people who want to get into fun decks. Because there's so many decks that are so cheap and are very fun, but because they aren't competitive, you'll never hear about them. And you'll probably would never buy them if you didn't buy them specifically under the context of other people also having fun decks. So if y'all are interested in seeing a series, I'm thinking something like a series of shorts where I have every attribute type combination, and I talk about the decks that are that type attribute combination, and kind of pitch to you, the audience, different decks within each of those categories. And I hope that maybe that'll be a good entry level into this idea of budget fun decks, and might make it a little bit more accessible. Especially, I think a lot of new players, they have the deck they started with, but often it's some bait, like some nostalgia bait, some Yu-Gi-Oh deck, some Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Obviously, it's a Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Some deck from the show, a DM or a GX deck, whatever, a main character deck. And because of that, if they want to make the deck do its thing more consistently, it's going to break the bank. It's just the tax that comes with being a main character deck. But if they are willing to just look at some of these other strategies that aren't part of the anime, they'll find really developed strategies that are very affordable and very fun. And I think giving more new players a pathway to their fun deck could definitely help those people get into the game in a more competitive way, because they're grabbing decks that can actually make very competitive for what they are, unlike being just priced out of making a competitive hero deck. Because if you like heroes and you're a new player, you can't afford to play good hero deck. It's just not an option for you. But if you're a new player and you like Dinosaur, then you can build the most competitive version of Dinosaur. It's pretty simple, actually. It's pretty straightforward. With that in mind, I've been thinking about kind of the pipeline, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pipeline, right? I've talked about before how I think the pipeline needs to be expanded on the opening by having more Yu-Gi-Oh! Related things out there, like having Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime that just aren't people playing the show, but maybe have lore related things just being a show to itself. I've talked before about how Konami seems to have a weird thing about how they're going about certain... I think their idea of the target market is a little bit skewed, and it could be that I'm the one that's wrong. But they seem to like to appeal to a certain sort of just nerd culture. Like, instead of the specific gamer culture, I feel like that they should be targeting. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, they had a big event in Duel Links a while ago where they brought on voice actors for different characters in English, and then had them get coaches who were competitive players or content creators in the space. I believe DZeef was one of them, Nadir, a couple other people got to be coaches for these people, and it was a big tournament that they had a bunch of advertising for, except none of us actually saw it. So that's a problem to itself, that they don't advertise it. But I think that could be very easily remedied by taking advantage of this mild bump that we've had, not really a mild bump, this big bump we've had from streamers playing on stream Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially ones who are not necessarily associated with Yu-Gi-Oh! I think doing the event exactly like they did it for Duel Links, exactly like they did it for those voice actors, but instead they brought in content creators in the gaming space specifically. I think this would be awesome for them to bring in, if they brought in Magic the Gathering players, Digimon players, Hearthstone players, and of course just streamers who are looking for things to do on their channel, and brought them into this event with a coach, because I think that's really important. I think that's also important because that's how most of us learned how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't learn how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Downloading Master Duel is a great way nowadays, but most of us learned by having a person who explained to us how the rules work and how to play this deck and that deck, and then encouraged us being in our corner while we played against other people. And I think that this system is perfect for that. I just wish that they were a bit more discerning about who they enrolled in this system. That this system was expanded, first of all, to just happen more often. And especially if you do it with content creators, they advertise it themselves. They are going to, even if you don't pay them, if you just ask them, hey, do you want to be a part of this? They will tell people that they are a part of it. That is free advertising. And then obviously you should also include some actual advertising, I'd argue mostly on YouTube and Twitch, to get people interested. Because I think that's where your audience is. Obviously there's going to be some portion of the audience that's just kids. But I'm not really sure how much of the profit those people make up. I'd imagine we're looking at a lot of store owners and young adults who go to card stores that are some of the biggest movers of product. And those people, I think, are on YouTube and they're on Twitch, and they are and the people like them that could become them are also on YouTube and Twitch. That's what they have in common. So if you go into that space, you'll both be pandering to your already existing fans, because they're already in that space and they will enjoy that content. But you will also be catering towards these people who are susceptible to it, but maybe aren't very familiar, maybe don't know how the rules work, maybe they think it's too complicated, and then to be able to watch someone they care about get coached how to do it, and then play and have fun, could be the real thing that puts them down the pipeline. And now, so that's just the opening. The opening of the pipeline is more events that put eyeballs specifically of these people whose eyeballs we want to be on it, on the game. And also more even broader things like, again, just letting Netflix make a show based off one of the lore. Konami has already done this with Castlevania to wild success. If they can do something like that for Yu-Gi-Oh, that would be amazing. Especially if they tailor it towards the worldwide audience. I would be very curious to know how much of their profit is divided between the home market and the foreign market, but I would imagine that there are a lot more Yu-Gi-Oh players outside of Japan than inside. I could be very wrong about that. And so I think they should do more to pander to those players specifically, other than just what these little offices are doing. And I've mentioned before that since I want Mastery Duel to be the entry-level pipeline, that the format should be a lot more forgiving. Forgive that person's a really loud car. That the format should be a lot more forgiving. That we should really, really just root out all FTKs, all pseudo-FTKs, all that sort of stuff from Mastery Duel. Make it a baby, family-friendly format. And have the more hardcore stuff be TCG, OCG, Time Wizard formats. That's just my opinion. I don't know why Max U's still legal, so what do I know? And then as content creators, I think that more of us can do a good job of helping to guide new players through the pipeline that already exists, right? So this pipeline is newish because we have Master Duel now, and I have always told everyone, start with Master Duel. It's free, just play through the tutorial, and then if you have any questions, shoot me a text, I'll help you however I can, and then that'll give you a huge leg up in getting started, right? But then we also want to convert those players, for us TCG players, we want to then convert them to TCG players. And to do that, budgeting is going to be part of that conversation. And procedure, how are you going to do it? You don't really want them to just go open product. Maybe that's what Konami wants, but that's not a wise financial decision per se, especially for new players who don't really know what makes a good value and a bad value product. Obviously, we're going to recommend that they get structure decks, and Konami has been doing a good job for ages now. Even if they aren't the most competitive decks, that structure decks have always been very fun and have very cohesive strategies that new players can pick up and play. So I very much appreciate that, Konami. But stuff like sealed only has kind of given people a peek at how you can do it, how you can navigate. You want to pick up a deck first, and then you look for staples. And then after you've picked up your staples, now you're going to start picking up more decks because it's cheaper because you already have the staples. And to spell that out more, if you are a new player, I would highly recommend you find a strategy that you like, preferably something from a structure deck that came out recently because they will be cheap. And lots of people will have already labbed out how to make that deck as competitive as possible. And then you should start playing that deck. And as you go, you can keep getting staple cards, like going second cards, side deck cards, hand traps, to improve that deck. And then later down the line, after you have most of those staple cards, you'll be able to look at the metagame, and whichever meta deck you like the best, you already have all the staple cards, so that price tag is reduced significantly. And if you're the kind of player who's already at that point, I would recommend Branded, actually. Getting 3 of the structure deck is a coherent strategy, and you can pick up the staples as you go along. And then that deck has a lot of upward mobility where you can slowly upgrade it by adding more and more cards that you need without breaking the bank every step of the way. Because the intimidating thing is going from 0 to a $1,500 deck like Kashtira. Or even 0 to a $500 deck like Labyrinth. Or 0 to the $400 deck like Branded. Where if you can break that up into these smaller purchases, this deck which then gets upgraded with some staples, and then gets upgraded like this and like that. You can walk people down to spending that $400 while being allowed to have fun every step of the way. Yep. Well, I've prattled on for a while now, and I hope you enjoyed this solo episode, even though it was just me. I do like to believe I have some interesting thoughts about the metagame and about especially product and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pipeline that I've probably talked about too much at this point, but I find it very interesting and also infuriating at times how they have missed what I feel is an obvious mark they could hit with this sort of thing. How much bigger the game could be if they got their act together a little more. I'm sure they're doing what they can, and I'm not saying they're doing a bad job. I just see how the top end could be, and I wish for it as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player who wants more people to be enjoying our game. I recently saw an MBT video where he talked to a senator that plays Yu-Gi-Oh!, which just shows you just how big and wide our community is getting. Of course, forever ago we had that soccer player who Konami made a big effort about talking to. I think that was a little bit of a misstep, because that person wasn't really that invested in the game. I think they'd be better off doing what I said earlier about coaching and having these tournaments of these content creators that have some interest, and then we give them the coaching, and then we get them in a tournament, and now there's this whole event around it. So I want more of that, please. Thank you. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day.